Well, even now that's a long-term aim. It is not as if today you can admit to about 5 things and say, look, I've brought it down. I'm not sticking to what has been said in the earlier regime.
Right.
And also to give a message saying, come what may, it is only the markets that I have to address because they have to have confidence. We want the markets to have confidence. But at the same time, you really cannot rehash the numbers in such a way that whilst you're saying there's not enough money, new revenues have to be looked at, expansion of net taxable base has to be widened. With all this in mind, how could you immediately say, sorry, we are not going to go by that? That's a whole idea of taking responsibility, and responsibility understanding the implication. Here, having accepted that, there is enough headroom for non-tax revenues. And if the figures which have been roughly worked out, I would think there is about 56,000 crores possible for us as non-tax and also other avenues of earning, therefore giving ourselves a headroom to bring it down to say about 4.1. And it is not an unrealistic estimate, and it is not an opportunity lost. Certainly, you are not going to be able to contract on a lot of expenditure. And contracting expenditure, ideally, if theoretically you're looking at it, would give, oh, yes, there is a sense of responsibility with which you're dealing with the budget. But these are issues where a lot of other implications are there. You have to be gradual in doing things.
Right.
One. And second, contraction itself may have a negative impact on the economy. You're not going to be able to keep the vibrancy of the economy, whilst once you're talking about it and another time you're going to say, I'm going to cut down on expenditure. So you have to have a realistic way of handling it. So it's not as if we have lost an opportunity, but we have understood how to retain the buoyancy and also pep it up.
Fair point indeed, but this was also your opportunity to have let the fisc expand a little, let the deficit expand by a little, say 4.4%, 4.5%. Investors would have taken it in their stride, is largely the consensus view. They would have said this is a new government, they're trying to assess the numbers that were handed over. They would have perhaps taken it in their stride. Why did you not take that chance? Because the budget mathematics is still belying how are you going to get to 4.1%.
But I find a contradiction in that. Whilst you're telling me that the markets are getting upset about the way in which we've lost an opportunity.
Because they thought you could have slipped a little.
No, yet if you're looking at a possibility of why not, let there be deficit. Because after all, that is also going to mean that there's greater expenditure and that will pepper.
Yes.
The same argument is being used by the FM in a different way. He says, well, right, I accept the figure, but I'm also not going to contract expenditure. At the same time, I'll widen my income base. And if I do that, if the revenue base widens and I'm able to get more money, I'll still be able to contain my deficit. So he's done a very creative, at the same time, responsible way of handling it.
Fair point indeed, but does this budget mathematics assume there'll be a 20% growth in the tax revenue, and isn't that too ambitious considering the last fiscal it grew at barely 10%?
Well, it's also a question of how we are looking at various options. One, without really being repressive, also make the whole system of tax collection more efficient,
right?
And have a lot of faith in the people saying tax is going to be something which they'll want to build for a strong India and so on. So I think that's not unrealistic, but lots waits to be seen in terms of efficiency in tax collection also. On that there will be a lot of stress.
I'm going to turn focus and talk about the one thing that everybody wanted to hear, and they did not hear it from the finance minister. He came so close and yet so far, and which is why one did see the knee-jerk reaction. They perhaps digested it with other news that did come in. The question of retrospective taxation, he has said that the government in principle is opposed to taxing things retrospectively, but he hasn't repealed that. He hasn't done away with the retrospective tax. That ghost looms somewhere in the background. You may never go back to it, but it is still there. Why was it so tough to let go of it, to outdo it completely?
On a lighter note, even that would be a retrospective act.
to do away with the retrospective tax.
But the fact is, we've almost very clearly laid it bare that we are not going to be pursuing anything based on that amendment, and everything which is going to come anchoring on that or referring to that would be adjudicated upon. So we've left that there.
Right.
But moving forward, we are also very clearly saying we are not going to fall back on that. So I think it's a very practical, and when you're talking of government, you're moving seamlessly as it were. Yes, it's a new government, a completely new government in the sense of ideological inclination.
That's right.
And a completely new government which believes in market economy.
True.
For which ideally, we could have said, no, we are not, going to deal with that at all. But when you're looking at a certain seamless continuity in certain policies, at the same time understanding the bad message that had sent, you are looking a very, what I would say, a graceful way of coming out of it. So, and explained it. It's not as if we are shrouding it. We are very clearly saying we understand the bad message, we understand the implication it had, and therefore we commit ourselves not to fall back on it. But at the same time, when you're looking at retrospectively things which pertain to that period, is something which we cannot extricate ourselves, and therefore we say let courts decide on it.
But do you think the investor community is buying your argument? They will eventually buy it.
Certainly, because when you're talking of a governmental decision, they cannot be topsy-turvies every many times.
Yes.
To establish the credibility of decision making in the government, you will have to accept some things which did not go ideally. Which, if I were there,
you just have to live with them.
You have to live with them. But at the same time, don't live with them as though you're shouldering the burden. You detach yourself from it. This has been a very imaginative way of removing it, but yet leaving it where it should be, but moving forward with a lot more clarity.
I'm going to go back to the fisc. I particularly wanted to ask you this question because that's the question that has shrouded the minds of a lot of investors. Go back to the fisc and talk about the subsidy burden. A lot of people thought that when Finance Minister Jaitley does rise to present his maiden budget, because the Prime Minister has been speaking about this bitter pill, the bitter pill was really missing for better days. People were prepared to take that bitter pill in small dosages. There is still no talk about a subsidy cut. There is no talk about subsidy rationalization, be it in food, fuel, or even fertilizer. In fact, there's a greater allocation to fertilizer. Is that again a case of the political will not being there?
No, absolutely. I wouldn't take that route at all. Political will is there, and that's why you're willing to give in spite of the mandate that you have, in spite of the expectations that you built up.
Right.
Not with our effort, but natural to have that kind of an expectation. You have gone, in a way, one step at a time. You may want to interpret it as being cautious, but one step at a time, you're sure that you're not rushing into certain areas. Cutting down on subsidies may be very well taken again from the market point of view.
Right.
But here is here are a couple of programs which need a lot of tweaking and correction, and that's what we went forward with. When he had said about Manrega, he has not cut down on the expenditure.
Yes.
And
he's talking about asset creation.
Asset creation, which has been one of those things on which the CAG had come down heavily on the Manrega. Spending this money, yes, you're giving employment, yes, you're bringing in those sections which suffer when monsoon or agriculture activity is low, you want them in, but yet for the money spent, what is the asset? That is a very clear course correction suggested by the CAG, and we are going on with it. So in fact, I'll go one step further to say the quick, not so well thought out criticism by the Congress is just not with basis. Where is the social sector or something of that kind has been a question raised by the Congress. Please look in. Hasn't the Manrega been reinvested in? Hasn't the social sector implications of food security be kept up? So to rush in to say you're copying, you want us to dump those programs? No, we'll continue.
Right.
But at the same time, since we're continuing, wouldn't you want to see that there's a social sector implication?
Right.
Somewhere, people did not expect Mr. Jaitley to come up with a very well designed budget where every aspect has been covered and nothing has been dumped for a ready criticism. So I think we have to apply our mind on this budget to know its true implication, rather than not certain parties which jump into it.
I will still ask you one more question on subsidies before I move away. When the diesel deregulation happened, when the diesel deregulation happened, it happened in small dosages. So it was politically palatable, people took it in their stride. Is the government not going to look at doing something like that with a urea or with an LPG subsidy?
No,
after all, yes.
From your previous question and this one.
Right.
Petrol is already almost
deregulated, yes.
Diesel is on that route. Kerosene is hardly any,
That's right.
And therefore, on a set of subsidies where the route is already paved and you're moving forward towards, opening up, there need not be a drastic change because systemic, slow but steady movement is something which is already in the framework. So there is no need for us to harp on that point because we are only moving, we have not taken a step backward.
That's right.
That's one. And given the fact that Iraq is looming large. We very clearly, the government has seized to the matter and it is looking at various different options so that there is no shock on the Indian economy in terms of crude or oil or anything.
Right.
Given all this factor, we have not taken a step backward, we are moving in that direction. So I don't think that is a negative message. As regards urea, soil cards are being distributed.
True.
There's a great deal of awareness being built among farmers and also the peasant community, essentially through also these outreach programs, Krishi Vigyan Kendras and so on, to stop excessive usage of fertilizers and urea. Particularly urea, we've been discouraging and looking at micronutrients.
That's right.
And therefore, this is not something which is going to be a big burden in that sense, but certainly something which will continue only from the point of view of food security of the nation.